the spread, and they were talking about how this has been unprecedented because of unexpected torrential rain in the area, which is why there was a lot of locust breeding, and it just grew out of control. And the countries weren't prepared for it because this was something that hadn't happened in around 25 years. And I think in the case of Kenya, it hadn't happened in like 70 years. So it was very difficult for them to manage it, but they tried doing it by using like, uh, you know, they used jets to spread pesticides, and they were apparently specific to the desert locusts and were not harming the fauna and the flora that was already on there. But it did cause a lot of damage before they were able to take control of it, because uh, a desert locust can eat about its own weight, and in a single day, and there were billions of them. So and they can travel around like 200 kilometers a day. So they kept traveling and eating crop after crop, and it created a huge food deficit, which was very difficult to manage.
Right. And who's next? Someone else also watched it. Mansoor, anything that Hassan didn't mention that you would like to talk about?
So I watched the first 10 minutes of the video. So in that it was that the locusts are spreading in mostly agricultural areas, and they are destroying the food crops, which are a necessity and which is causing a global food crisis, because I don't remember, but 10% or 20% of the population is getting affected by this locust spreading. It has been in Ethiopia, Somalia. It is started from Somalia, and now it is spreading to other African countries, and also it mentioned about spreading in Pakistan. And another point I would like to make was that these locusts are not very dangerous when they are separate or when they are at individual when they are alone, but when they form their groups, when they are in thousands, they can be dangerous, and they can eat a lot. I think they can eat 200 tons per day, I guess, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that
So
is
basically,
what I remember.
thank you. Thank you, Mansoor. So the point of sharing that video was something similar took place in the last lecture, where I shared a case study in order to tell you how interdisciplinary this field is, and how we will not be restricted to one particular area or one particular type of study. And there I told you how electrical engineers had their share to play, how those who were studying laws had their share to play, and how a common citizen could do a certain something to make sure that this city becomes a cleaner city of the United States of America. With this video, what I wanted to show you was, because we're going to be talking a little, I will keep it basic again today, unlike what I wanted to do. It's just an introduction to environmental sciences today, but the reason why I shared that video with you was it was very recent, and that video was from a time of the pest invasion until it had come to Pakistan. So it had started invading Pakistan, but until then it was an African problem, sort of. And we had the time to learn from how Africa was treating or being treated by that locust swarm. And then we saw that during COVID, locust swarm hit Pakistan, and the farmers were saying that this is worse than COVID. Their pandemic isn't actually COVID, but it's the locust swarm that's eating all of their produce. And farmers were stuck badly by it. And then what I also wanted you to see or learn via that was, different terms like migratory pest. It's something that otherwise, these are very new, very evolving terms. We haven't known about them for, at the scale, at least with which locust swarm was able to travel from Africa to Pakistan or to South Asia, and how it hit both African farmers and Pakistani and Indian farmers in the same way. So sometimes a problem is of different regions, but then the way it hits certain people is the same. Sometimes the problem is the same, the root cause is the same. And then we also saw how climate change contributed to growth of locusts, and then how if the locust population isn't controlled, as a solitary it's all right, but once it gathers, it becomes an army and it swarms into your field and it can eat all your crops away, and then that becomes a problem. And so those are like the kind of things that I wanted you to see. And then towards the end, I think there was a humanitarian aid person. So how that thing leads on to a humanitarian issue, and how that the humanitarian assistance as well as FAO and food security would come into play when trying to solve the problem. So that's basically what I wanted all of those who are new to take away from the lecture, from the video. And I think we should just not waste more time and start with what we want to study today. Right, so again, I need 2 volunteers. And so everything that isn't me is my environment is a quotation by a very big scientist. Can you guess who the scientist is? So he was asked what is environment, and he said, I'm giving you a clue, that everything that isn't me is environment. Anyone who knows can raise their hand. 3, 4, 2, 1, 0. Okay, so it was Albert Einstein who said that everything that isn't me is my environment. And right now, my environment is this room. It's the air that's in here. It's the artificial lights. It's the temperature that the air condition maintains for me. It's the kind of air that's in here. It could be a certain gas that is being produced by these electronic gadgets. And it could be multiple things, but right now it is a part of this built environment. Let's say if I was sitting in Hunza, it would be a natural environment. It would be the mountains. It would be the clean air. It would be the water. It would be the animals that are around me. And it could be all of those insects and all of those microorganisms that are in the environment. Here, it could be because of those air conditions and the damp situation, the fungi, the microorganisms, and God forbid, it could also be a certain something or a virus that I do not want in my life right now. But basically, generally, when we think of environment, we always think of the natural environment. We think of, these beautiful mountains and this beautiful ecosystem. So for example, if you've seen Our Planet by David Attenborough, or if you've seen the Nat Geo documentaries, what's shown to you is pristine, beautiful environment, and we often think that that's all that we have. But our environment is so much more complicated than that. And sometimes it's far, far away from the natural environment that we see outside of us. Right now, as I said in the previous lecture, it is mostly the built environment, these artificial environments that we have built for ourselves. And it has changed everything about how a human lives, right? And in this particular course, so that's like I wanted to say a layman term of what environment is, but because Einstein said it, I can't say that anymore. But a more academic definition of environmental sciences would be that it's an interdisciplinary field, which puts us, the human, at the center of everything that is around us. So how we interact with the living beings around us, as well as how we interact with the non-living beings around us. So the biotic factors and the abiotic factors. And through this course, I wanted you to learn 3 things. The earth has sustained itself for billions of years, right? We say that the earth was formed, 4.5 billion years ago. And life was formed almost 3.5 billion years ago. And these 3.5 billion years haven't been easy for the planet. The planet has had to face a lot of things. You speak about, a lot of outer space things coming into the territory of Earth. You speak about things hitting Earth. You speak about the tectonic plates moving, disasters, natural or otherwise. And still the planet has sustained itself. It is thriving still. So a lot of people could say that nothing's going to happen to us because nothing has happened in the past 3.5 billion years. We would just understand that concept, but also at some point see how that is not true, how things that we are changing the lifestyles that we have now would actually bring Earth to a very different kind of cosmos in the near future. And we're already seeing how things are becoming stale in our lives and in the life of this planet. So that would be the first thing that we want to learn. The second thing is, of course, how we interact with the environment. And right now, like I said, environmental sciences is about us being in the center because we are in charge of everything. We are taking care of everything and we are overexploiting everything. And we are sort of controlling everything as well. So as managers of the planet, it would be about our interaction with the environment, and it would be about how we manage it. And then finally, of course, we will see how we can live sustainably, how we can deal with these environmental problems, and how can we leave this planet as a better place for the future generations of this planet. And like I said, environment can be natural, it can be man-made. That's also called built environment. And within that natural environment, we interact with living things, which are called biotic, and we interact with non-living things, which are called abiotic. But there are many ways in which you can define it. So if you pick up a book, for example, from biology or chemistry, like I said, they would define environment in a different way. So even just the natural part of it could be defined as an example for you. Someone could say that the natural environment is divided between terrestrial and aquatic environment, that you have life that lives on earth and then you have life that lives on water. And then that life on water is divided between the life that lives in the oceans and the life that lives in fresh water, which includes your streams and rivers and lakes. And then within that fresh water, people could say that there are multiple kinds of environments, such as lentic or low-tech, which is available, like whether it's a running stream or whether it's standing somewhere, right? You don't need to go into that, a lot of science behind it, but it's just for you to understand that our environment is very unique and very different, and the way we define it as individuals can be very different. And these are just two examples of how someone could define their environment based on what their expertise are. So it's basically, if we just look at the human, because I said we always put the human at the heart of it. So if I'm putting a human at the heart of it, then it essentially is that interaction between all of those living things that live on this planet. And like I said, the non-living things or the physical components of the environment. And the physical components, as we all know, can be your solar light, the air, the soil, and water. And the biological factors or the bio side of the environment would be all of that life which exists on planet. From microorganisms up to, let's say, a carnivore. And we are right in the middle of it. So we kind of control everything, because if forests are being cut to claim more agricultural land, we decide that. And we decide that because we need more land for us to grow more crops, right? And that basically is environmental sciences. And before I proceed, although it's not relevant in this part of in this section of the study, but these food webs are very complicated. And that's why I wanted to discuss the locust population and the locust swarm in the beginning, because that has a lot to do with the food web that we are seeing today. Those locusts were always present in the environment. Right? Those existed as pests in our environment. So what happened for them to just invade the planet or a certain part of the planet was that we messed up this web that you're seeing. Maybe two things happened. The climate changed and the conditions became conducive for them to grow more, to breed more, and to dominate the place. But also in the food web, a lot of birds who could feed on them, their environments were damaged. So let's say if a certain migratory bird used to come to the desert and feed on these, their environments were destroyed, and that's why they couldn't come, right? Or we didn't leave their nests in those migratory paths, or the local populations of birds were compromised on, which resulted on their population declining and the population of these increasing. So it wasn't just the physical part, which is climate change, increasing the moisture, increasing those sort of conditions where they would breed, but also us changing lives of something that would feed on these. And all of that then resulted for it to be the way that it is today. As you would have seen in the video, that they said otherwise it's just harmless. It's one single creature and that's it. But once it's together, it turns into this army that could feed on your crop. So although it's not a part of environmental sciences, because environmental sciences really deals with just this first half where we are in the center and we are controlling everything else around us.
Excuse me, ma'am, I'm just interrupting you. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So, ma'am, continuing the example that you were giving about the locust swarm. So, I read somewhere in the newspaper that it was mainly caused due to that the government did not sprayed the fields, and there were loopholes at the side of the government. So, wasn't this the only reason due to which the virus spread continuously, and it affected all the crops in the Punjab and Sindh region?
Yeah.
Because according to the government, it was the only reason. They were not claiming any other natural reason according to them. Yeah. So
I think it's very unfortunate. Thank you for bringing this up, because even when I was reading about locusts when it was happening, I thought, because I wanted to find out exactly what happened, right? Even the fact that these local bird populations have declined was something that I found out after a lot of research. So none of the content, contemporary journalism content that was available out there told you about climate change, told you about how the conditions for their growth became conducive, told you about them being migratory pests, or the fact that they could travel for a longer distances. That sort of basic information wasn't simply available there. And I think
okay,
that's why I wanted you to have a look at this, because what you saw with reference to Pakistan on TV or on the internet wasn't enough information. There
okay,
isn't just one thing that goes about it. But of
okay,
course, once you have them breeding, once you have them growing in larger numbers, then you have to kill them, right? And you would only kill them through pesticides or whatever
yes,
means that you use. So for example, if you burn fires or do whatever in your local populations, it's slightly more dangerous for you and for your crop as well, right? Because if you're putting a lot of pests into it, then pests are not healthy for the environment either. A lot of them are carcinogenic. A lot of what's being used here is not good. So maybe a lot of chemists here would know exactly what pesticide was used for killing the locust population, and would then tell that pesticide can only be used in a certain amount. And if it was exceeded, and if it bioaccumulated, or if it deposited on, or was biosorbed into the plant and we ate it, it actually came into our system as well, which is not good for us as human beings. Or and the same could be said for the bird population or the animals who ate those plants, right?
right,
And that's exactly what I want you to know when I mention these things. And that is, it's very, very, very complicated. It's not as simple as this happened, and as a result of that, this happened. It's a lot of things into interplay. And that's exactly what environmental sciences is. So that would be like your introduction to environmental sciences in one case study. Right? But like I said, that environmental sciences looks at this field with human in the center. But if we try to be more sustainable, if we try to make this planet a better place and coexist with our nature, then the second circle is something that we should be aiming for, which we're not aiming for at the moment. Right now, we're just talking about doing things sustainably with us being the managers. But I think at some point we have to take a step back and consider ourselves a part of this entire ecosystem and a small player in the management of the ecosystem, and live in harmony with nature, right? And not disturb anything. But that's not directly related to environmental sciences. I put the slide on because a lot of people get confused when they hear ecosystem, ecology, and environmental sciences. And I thought, because you're going to be studying environmental sciences, these terms would pop up all the time and they will confuse you. Environmental sciences is a huge discipline, and it is very interdisciplinary. And ecosystem is ecosystem, not ecosystem, but ecology is a relatively smaller section of biology that deals with studying the ecosystem. And ecosystem is a certain number of populations living together in an environment. So for example, LUMS has an ecosystem of students living together to learn. If LUMS was a forest, then we would be a certain species of kingdom Animalia living in a forest called LUMS, where we thrive and interact with the biotic and abiotic components of our environment. So again, like within the ecosystem, there are biotic components and abiotic components. So living components and non-living components. Those physical components, we rely on them because life needs to grow, for example, on soil, or oxygen is required from the air. So our need for nutrients, something that I've written on the side, and our need for energy is driven from all of this, from the biotic components and abiotic components of our environment. We drive our need to for material and for energy. So anything we do really on planet, why do we do it? We eat because we need energy to live, right? That the sole purpose of everything that we do is for us to have enough energy for survival, basically. So I think energy is something that would be an interesting component of environmental sciences, and we will look at it as we go. But right now, the only thing that I would like you to just think about is that from our environment, from our particular ecosystems, we take certain nutrients and we take energy, and it is essential for our survival. And I've explained it a little bit here, but we'll probably go into this in detail in the next lectures if we have time, is the fact that plants, animals, and microbes are a part of your biotic or living environment, and your physical and chemical environment, which is any chemicals that are present in the air or your land and soil, all those things that I mentioned in the previous slide, they're your abiotic components. And within the biotic components, there are producers, consumers, and decomposers. And I want someone from non-sciencey background to tell me what do they think are producers, consumers, and decomposers, because again, this is very basic science. Fateh.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. So what I think producers are basically the plants who basically produce food with photosynthesis, or yeah, and there's the consumers who like eat the plants, or more like consume the nutrients. And then there's decomposers who consume the dead remains of both producers and consumers.
Yes, that is correct. That is very
So
correct.
decomposer is also a kind of consumer in a twisted way.
Exactly. So it's a part of our biotic environment, and everybody is relying on somebody to meet their need for nutrients and meet their need for energy. And producers are the only one who are doing the hard work, which are the plants. That is, they take the sunlight from the sun, and then they take the carbon dioxide from the air, and then they take water from the roots, and then they combine it together to form glucose, which is basically your source of energy later. I have put it in a slide, maybe it's coming up soon. Yeah, there you go. So basically, generally people just teach you the photosynthesis, right? Which is the reverse of this. So let's say you have the solar here, excuse my drawing. So you have the solar light here, and then the plants are taking the solar energy using carbon dioxide from the air, and then combining it with water, which is coming from their roots, and then converting it into glucose and oxygen. They're very basic. So this is like the most basic equation of life, I think. And that's why I thought all of you should know it. So basically you have water and carbon dioxide combining together to form glucose, which is C6H12O6, and oxygen. So I think all of you know that when this is like a standard definition, that when we breathe, we take in carbon dioxide, and when we exhale, we release. Or when we breathe, we take in oxygen. When we exhale, we're taking carbon dioxide out. So that's respiration, or cellular respiration. And the plants, they can do both. They can take carbon dioxide from the environment as well as oxygen from the environment, because their cell needs to respire. So respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. And photosynthesis technically happens for you to eventually respire and get this energy for work, get this energy to survive, get this energy to live. In a more complicated bio or chemistry, you would probably call it ATPs. We don't need to go into that detail, but it's basically the fact that two reactions occur for our life to survive, or for this food chain to occur in the environment, and that's photosynthesis and respiration. In photosynthesis, carbon dioxide combines with water in the presence of sunlight in a plant to convert into glucose and oxygen. And in respiration, or in cellular respiration, glucose and oxygen would break down back into carbon dioxide and water and release energy. And that's the energy that you need to perform, that you need to talk, that you need to sit in front of the Zoom and listen to and watch a certain something. I know this is simple, but if someone still has difficulty in comprehending it, they can ask me a question. Great. Okay. So this is a slide that's from the next lecture, but I've only put it here. It's not complicated at all. It's very simple. I put it here only for you to get an idea, because we're going to be talking about producers. And producers are basically autotrophs. So they're like same names for different things. Producers are called producers because they produce food. They're called autotrophs because they can produce their own food. And they take energy from the sun. And then they can respire as well. So the plants also respire. And then there can be waste product of that particular process. And some of it, for example, if we are consumers, so these are all consumers, herbivores, primary carnivores, and secondary carnivores. Herbivores are only plant eaters, and they would assimilate a certain amount of energy into them. So when we food eat, we don't take all of it into our body. Some of it is excreted in the form of waste. Some of the excess water would be excreted in the form of feces. So that. And then when we're working, when we're exercising, we dissipate the energy. When our body is regulating the temperature, we also release energy. And that happens from the food that we are taking in. So in every process, whether we are herbivores who are only eating plants, and then we are carnivores who are eating meat and plants, could be, or if we are secondary carnivores who only eat meat. In all of this, and in all of these food chain, we would release energy in different forms. We would assimilate, or also just call it accumulate, so if we accumulate protein, or if we turn it into protein, if we have fats in our body, that would be assimilation. But if we're working and we're releasing energy, if we are going to the gym and releasing energy, whatever we are doing, or simple day-to-day daily excretory products, that would all be release of energy. So when I said in the previous simpler slides that there is need for energy and there is need for nutrients, that comes from the environment, and producers have a major role to play in it. And for producers to play that role, we must have the humble sun somewhere doing all of that for us. And that's why I just put this slide here for you to know, because I would be teaching a little more complicated things with reference to this slide, but not today. Today, it's just for you to absorb what I mean when I say energy is our need. What I mean when I say energy flows from one level in the food chain to another level in the food chain. What I mean when I say that sunlight is essential for life on this planet, right? This slide was there for you to just understand those basic things. And like I said, a lot of people confuse ecology with environmental sciences. In both, we study interaction of living and non-living beings of a certain species or very many species in environmental sciences. But the only difference in environmental sciences is that we could be looking at not just biology, chemistry, and geology, but geography, economics, and political sciences as well. And not just those, but also ethics and philosophy. And I think that's why we get that space in this field to go beyond traditional science. Because like I said, in every case study that I've shared, in every video that I've shared, I've told you that environmental problems are not as simple as just a simple scientific problem with a simple scientific solution. There's so much more to it when you do it. Whereas in ecology, we just look at it as an ecosystem, which is a set of organisms or a set of species in a defined area in a certain time who are interacting with each other. In both, we are studying the same, but this is majorly biology, and environmental sciences is almost everything that we need to sustain the planet. And if you have any questions at some point, I'm not sure if I am good at following up, but please let me know. Please raise your hands and please follow up. So in the last lecture, there's something that I told you, which was that this would also be another key component in the discussion that we have in this semester or in this entire course, which is that if we want the planet to be sustainable, or if we think about how the planet has survived and thrived for this long, it has been because of these three principles of sustainability. When I said that sunlight is important for life on the planet, of course, Earth has survived because sunlight has been there. Of course, Earth has survived because nutrients have continuously cycled into the environment and recycled into the environment. And then Earth has survived because there has been biodiversity to ensure that nutrient cycling and to ensure that flow of energy and that flow of material that Earth would need to survive. And that's why when one species is missing, or when one species goes extinct, or when one species is endangered, we're so worried for the environment. It's because for Earth to thrive, every individual or every animal or every component of biodiversity has a role to play, and that role is compromised on. So if birds were dwindling in population, and if locust population could increase, that was basically because something happened to the biodiversity that should not have happened. So that's something that we will study as well. Any questions so far? Because now I will dive into these
Ma'am,
Yes.
so you were talking about the nutrient cycle and all. Recently, there was a report by BBC which like showed that about the wildlife is reduced by 65%. So what implications does it hold for us as humans? What if all of that goes extinct or something like that?
So like I said,
the wildlife population.
Sorry about that. So the wildlife like there's a lot. For example, the ibex population in Hunza, something that I can think of instantly. It was endangered. It was going down, and there were no evident impacts of it going extinct, right? But when we conserved it, when conservation was observed with the help of World Wildlife Fund for nature, then the population increased. So technically, when it wasn't there, there wasn't much that was not happening, that we could not operate without it, because it's a wild animal and it stays in the mountains and it grazes there. But then, if you know the snow leopards up there, they rely on meat for them, right? So, and these animals, they graze above a certain altitude, and then they have life form there. So in that small cycle there is important. So maybe if one species extincts, then a lot of other species extinct because of them, and then that dwindles life for you, because there has to be a balance even amongst animals for population as well. And I think 50% is a very it's not a conservative figure. I don't know what research they did to back that up, but it is obvious that every time
Sorry for interrupting, ma'am. The start was 65%, not 50. Like
65%,
more than 50.
more than 65.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. So maybe for first,
around 65 or more than.
and what did they say was the consequence of that?
I don't remember the exact consequence. They just told it was just a headline by some news channel. So
Okay, okay. So like I said, like I don't need to go into the details right now because we will be discussing biodiversity later. The example that I've shared of locust and bird population and their interconnection for pest control, that's also something that I think would have given you an idea of what happens when one population is compromised on or when its habitat is changed. But and it's not healthy for the environment. And like I said in the previous slide, that the biodiversity is important because we want earth to strive for a longer amount of time for our future generations. And if we compromise on biodiversity and their habitats, we may not ensure that kind of healthy environment for our future generations. How they will live, that we don't know, right? But life would become difficult. Yes, Fateh.
So I'm talking about animals and biodiversity and its impact on humans. But as someone who studies history, I came across an example of this. If I may share it.
Go ahead.
Thank you. What I seem to remember is in America, there's this animal, the American bison. So, in the 19th century, during the westward expansion of Americans into the Midwest and then into California and all those places, they used to hunt a lot of bison, um, American bison, for their hides and for their meat. Now they later on they began to overhunt it, but once the railroads connecting the eastern USA to the western USA also became constructed, many of the travelers would simply take out their rifles and start shooting at bison.
Hmm.
Now it's not now this did cause a lot of trouble for the Native Americans who really relied on bison for their meat and for their hides for making tents and for the horns for making tools. Their entire food supply and tool supply simply just vanished. That's why they had to move around a lot and many of them died.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Fateh, for sharing this, and thank you that you're sharing it despite the fact that you're from the history department. So I have this set of, like last time I was telling you how Earth is a system, and sometimes when you're looking at problems, environmental problems, you have to look at Earth as a system. And we spoke about the abiotic components of the environment, which is the land, the water, as well as the air. Um, we we saw how that, as a part of that closed system, if for example we take the biology or biodiversity out of it, in that closed system, what is happening? There is an interlink between each physical component, right? Air is giving water to the water bodies as well as to the land. Water from the surface is going to the ground. Water from the surface is going to the ocean. And similarly, water is evaporating from the ocean to become a part of the air, the clouds, the atmosphere. But this is like a simple sketch of how close these physical components are in the earth. And evaporation and transpiration, evaporation is simple water going into the atmosphere, and transpiration is with the help of the plants. So with this closed system, I wanted you to see how these physical components in the environment are interlinked as well. It's not just a relation of living with the non-living, but in a relation of all of these physical components in the environment with all of the other physical components. Now, nature has so many of these components that provide you service, that are called natural services. I'll give you a reading at the end today where this will also be called ecosystem services. So nature is doing that for you without, you don't have to pay Earth for soil renewal. You're not paying Earth for purifying your water. You're not paying Earth for controlling your climate. It's so warm, and suddenly, because of the evaporation and the water cycle, rain happens. Nature's doing a lot of these services for you, which we are not paying for. So there are these natural resources, which I've put in the blue. And then there are those natural services which fall under all of those physical and biological aspects of the environment that are good for us, that are good for life, that are good for material and energy flow on the planet. And what happens is that all of this, and of course, I've also not forgotten the solar energy. Solar energy has an important part to play in this as well. And so pest control, you can see we discussed a pest today, and then biodiversity has an important role in pest control. Otherwise, one population will increase and the other population will dwindle, and there will be an imbalance in the environment. And before I go ahead, you would see non-renewable and renewable. So there can be two kinds of energy or two kinds of materials. Some that you continuously have at your disposal on Earth, and some that cannot be renewed. So if you're taking iron from the environment, you will not be able to renew it. There's only a certain source of something that you can take, and then you cannot bring it back as iron. Like iron will not form naturally until it has a reserve somewhere, right? In some mountain. So whatever amount it's in the environment, it's just there. And then there's other that is renewable. So wind is renewable. That's why people would say we need to use renewable forms of energy like sun, wind, water when they talk about energy production, because we know that they will always be there. Their intensities may increase or decrease, the weather may change, and that might change the wind speed or velocity, but wind will always be there. It's a renewable resource. But energy is not, fossil fuel is not. Energy in the form of sunlight is, energy in the form of fossil fuels is not. So just because we will study this later, but I just wanted you to know that there are those forms as well. So nature has resources which are both renewable and non-renewable. That is, they have a continuous supply or they have a certain reserve. And then it provides you with certain services. And what happens is that together they give you a natural capital. And if you forget this natural capital for now and go back to the previous figure that I had shared with you, I shared a simple figure where I said that the physical components have an interconnection with each other. They're interrelated with each other. But now I am going to, so that was pristine environment. No life was existing on that closed system. In this particular closed system, let's say we're talking about a very ancient city. Let's say we're talking about a Roman city or a Roman Empire. And they have just one source of water, which is a certain mountain. And then they have their own sewer system, which I've mentioned above for your knowledge. So that community has a certain population, it has a certain water supply, it has its own sewage or sewer system, and it's still not being polluted. There are byproducts. Waste could be going from one form to the other form because population is living there. They might have used certain things from soil, from water, from air, and then they might have disposed of certain things into the environment. But if you compare it with the previous figure, which is this, it's simple, right? You have certain physical components that are just contributing or going into each other's territory in another form. Then you go here, and because there is a certain population, now this population is using clean water, this Roman village, they're using clean water from the Apennine Mountains, and then they are sending it to their sewers, which at that time was one of the best sewerage systems of the time, which is Cloaca Maxima, right? So they have a system, but the figure is not simple anymore because the physical environment has waste coming into it, and there's certain processes, whether it's burning or contaminating water or contaminating air by burning of those waste products, the environment is not simple anymore. Okay? And if you jump a little more ahead, forget the Roman Empire, let's go into the early 90s or the earlier 20th century. And we're saying that now everyone is industrializing. Everyone is bringing in industries. We want to produce majorly not only crops, but also grow as manufacturers, which means that our lifestyle has improved, which means that our population has improved, which means that our consumption has improved, which means that our waste production has improved. And so the graph has gotten complicated and complicated and more complicated. So you see that now not only is the sewer going into the water, but the sludge, because the population is a lot, so it won't degrade on time. So that sludge, which is the solid excreta, would come and settle in the land and would either become a fertilizer or would either become a contamination based on how quickly it degrades or how quickly are the microorganisms able to turn that waste into usable product. And similarly, if you're burning something, you are sending those particulate matters into the air. If you are putting sewer into water, this is also something that we'll study later, but it's just for you to have a knowledge of how complicated things get when population increases and when resource consumption increases. But for you to know that if water is not clean, if wastewater is added into it, then methane could be released into the air. And methane is a greenhouse gas, which we are going to study about in future as well. Okay. So we spoke about natural capital, which is that there is a natural resource and there are natural services, which are also called ecosystem services. What is happening to this natural capital because we are living not sustainably on this planet? We are degrading them, right? So you would hear things like climate is changing, air is polluting, water is polluting, the water reserves are decreasing, that fisheries are decreasing, life is being impacted. So everything is a negative, negative, negative. And that negative basically is a degradation of your natural capital, which we spoke about. And when we compared certain environments, pristine, as well as environments that had become more industrial, what became was that we unsustainably used all of those resources: water, life below water, forest, life in the forest, air, everything that we need. We have kind of polluted it, or we have kind of, corrupted it. And it's not a capital anymore. It's not a natural resource anymore because it's also contaminated. If you have put wastewater, industrial water into a water resource and it's polluted, it's no longer giving you the service of good life or healthy life that it was supposed to do. But that thing needs to be managed. And I just wanted to share two, these are very, very basic management tools. One is this one, which was developed in the 1970s, and it's called IPAT model, where you say that an impact is actually a combined effect of how much is the population, what is the consumption of that population per person, so the affluence, and what is the technology, so what impact is that consumption creating. And we'll have this, we're going to have a discussion on this in the coming slides. But IPAT was basically one of the first models to tell you, because prior to that, everyone thought that it only has to do with population. Population is increasing, that's why environment is degrading. It's not just a matter of population. And these two scientists actually showed that there are other things that are associated with it as well. That if there is a lot of population, but little consumption by each population, but very few people in number, but a lot of consumption, then that could be the reason why there's more impact on the environment. So with this simple equation, I just wanted you to show how you can model or how you can measure what impacts you're creating on the environment. So now I have a question for the entire class, which is you have to consider a developing and a developed country, not necessarily any, but just consider a random not a name, but in your head, think of a developed country and then think of a developing country, and then think of this equation. Let's say it's Pakistan and United States of America. And how would you say would change in population, affluence, or technology change the impact on the environment? And I already have a raised hand, which is of Rafe.
Hello, ma'am. I think that for like Pakistan, perhaps the population in the US has more affluence compared to us.
Mhm.
And perhaps because of the technology in play, they may also have it may also have like a higher degree of impact. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah. So, for example, if I say, okay, the population is high for Pakistan and it's lower for US, well, no, it's not lower for US, but let's say for a developing country, it's high. For a
Mhm.
developed country, it's less. And
Yes.
then for a developing country, you're saying that the affluence is less, but it's high for the developed country. And for the developing country, you're saying that the technology is less, but it's high for the developed country. And the impacts would still matter on what's more.
I think the impact would be like obviously like a combination of what's going on. But I think the affluence of a developed country would be more because of the fact that there's more usage of processed items and processed foods and
Yeah.
packaged material. And whereas I think for us there would be less of that. And in technology, um, we're referring to technology as technology, right? Like just what technology is. So I think that might actually reduce the waste for a developed country because of better engines in cars or like more environmentally friendly automobiles. So that would be
Yeah.
something that would but we can't actually say okay, impact iska zyada hoga.
Ji, ji. Anybody else? Thank you, Rafe. That was a great explanation. Taha.
Yes, ma'am. On this, I had a small question first, which was that when we consider the iPad model, does it include better, like cleaner ways of production?
Yeah, so basically, what we mean by technology is it does not have to, but what we mean by technology is bringing in a technology that would make the impact less or that would improve the impact. But it could also
Okay.
refer to technology that actually increases the impact. So if I am bringing in, if I'm buying a car which is really huge and I'm running it on fossil fuel, then I have a technology, but it actually has higher impact. So for example, for one individual who's actually only running only has a cycle, doesn't use a lot of resources, and is just one person, the impact would be lower. And I am the same person, I'm also consuming much less than he or she is, but I have a car that runs on fossil fuel, then the entire impact would depend on the technology that I have. That's what I wanted you to understand, that we could be two individuals living very similar lives, but sometimes the technology would increase the impact, sometimes only the technology would decrease the impact, sometimes the population would increase the impact. The impact is low but population is high, and that's why multiplied impact is great. Sometimes the increased affluence, I think something that the previous student already said, so which is a negation to what was believed in at that time, that everything has to do with population, right? So if someone has a new point that has already not been made.
Ma'am, yeah, I also had to make a small point, which was that affluence would definitely always be higher in a developed country, naturally, because there'd be lesser poverty. So people on average would be consuming more and everything. Whereas, yeah, similar to what you said on technology specifically, if you look at a country like US, sure, their impact towards the worst side will also be more because the people would have the money to afford
cars which would usually have greater emissions and everything. But other developed countries, such as if you look at Sweden and everything, their population would be much lesser, but their impact, on the other hand, would exactly vary on this specific point that people on average may definitely have more items which would usually cause a greater amount of carbon emission or definite general pollution. But now we've seen a trend that using electric cars and cleaner methods of even generating electricity, that countries like Sweden specifically, where it's their impact might be really low, and which developing countries just could not even don't even have the capital to ever get to, even with the lower population.
Yeah, Daniel, you want to say something? Have I lost Daniel?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
No, I wanted to know, how can we measure the affluence of a country?
So that's consumption per person, right? So for example, if you go back to the previous slide, so this is a basic model, and the reason why I wanted to share it here was, it's open to interpretation. So let's say we're just talking about an IPAD equation for, or like IPAD impact for cloth, textile or cotton consumption. And in that case, it would just be how much cotton is consumed by each person. Or fossil fuel consumption. In that case, it would just be how much fossil fuel is consumed per person. So it really varies. But if you want to look at the overall ecological footprint, like how much water is being used by me, or you could change it to just the water that I use at home versus the water that I use for the food that I eat versus the water that goes into every product that is coming into my house. That consumption per person would vary, and the scale at which you are calculating this would vary. But this is a very basic equation for you to know that impact is not as simple as, oh, because Pakistan has higher population, that's why our impact would be higher. Pakistan and Sweden could have similar impacts because of the same things that we discussed. That maybe they have technology that's curbing all the emission, but because they're so affluent, or because their consumption is so high, or because their lifestyle is such that even though the air is cleaner than we have, even though the population is lesser than we have, all of that products from abroad that are being imported in, which is affluence, actually has higher impact on the environment than the impact that Pakistan's creating, or is equal to the impact that Pakistan's creating. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I just wanted to make that point here for everyone to understand, with or without science background. Okay, can we go on to next slide, if you allow me? So the second model that I wanted to share is called ecological footprint. And these are just the two things that I would like to share with you today. One's the IPAT equation, which basically brought in the concept of how impacts can be measured beyond the traditional ideas of, because this is high, that's why the impact would be high. So it's a little more complicated than that. Ecological footprint majorly talks about the amount of water and land that I would need as an individual, or a country would need to sustain itself. So for example, again, in this case, we can think of a country A, which is a developed world country, and a country B, which is a developing world country. And what we are saying is that in both these countries, they will create an impact on the or they will create a footprint on the environment, which means that they need a certain space on the planet, like certain hectares on the planet on which their food would be grown, which they would require to stay alive. And then we also say that every land has capacity to hold life. So we for example, we sometimes say that Pindi or Lahore cannot take care of more people because we think that it already has people that it can take care of. in terms of transportation, in terms of healthcare, in terms of food production. It's just not just the environmental factors, but also the social factors as well. So we say in this many hectares remain for XYZ person, and this is the capacity. So the capacity could be high or low, again, based on whether we are a developed country or a developing country, and how many compromises can we make on how our household should look like, how many individuals would live in a house. So that biological capacity would change for a developed and developing country, and the footprint would change. Because if I'm in the US, maybe I'm buying a lot, maybe my fridge is always filled, maybe a lot of it is being imported, not only from outside, but just from other states, compared to if I'm living in Lahore. I just have vegetable coming from the outskirts of Lahore or from the mandi, which has much lesser impact than the impact that someone abroad would create. But this, of course, this is a tool that was developed globally, and they used certain data to identify what they think was enough as biological capacity and the ecological footprint. And the difference of that was called a debit or a credit, which means that, what do you think is, so I will let you explain it, because I think I've done a lot of talking today and I do not want to do a lot of talking today. Can anyone tell me what the two numbers reflect for country A and country B as the debit? No, Rafael, have you raised it? No, I'm not going to let you answer it because you've already answered. Somebody else. Mansoor.
Maybe this would be that this would be that the place in which where people live or where a community live, is it overpopulated or is it underpopulated? So the negative sign would be that it is underpopulated, like more people could be could sustain at this place or at this community.
Right. Anybody else? Yeah, like you're partly correct. Because I did not explain the first two terms well, I think I'll just take the later half as well. Basically, what it means is that I'm saying that if let's say country B is India and I'm an Indian, or if country B is Pakistan and if I'm a Pakistani, I'm saying that I would require 0.4 hectares per person to live in the country, right? The biological capacity of my country requires me to have 0.4 hectares, just me. Whereas the footprint that I have is 0.8, which means that I'm living on a much lesser land than the footprint that I'm creating, or the resources that I'm using require me to have more land, and my city cannot have that much land for just one person. So if I'm buying a lot of vegetables and that requires a lot of land, my city does not have enough land for all the citizens. And that's why there is a debit. And the debit means that I would need, or every individual in my city would need 0.4 hectares more to live the kind of lifestyle that we are living. And that's exactly what's happening in our cities. That our cities do not have the capacity to hold us like that. The city has a lot of people, so the biological capacity space is less, but our lives have become more affluent or more consumeristic in its approach, and that's why the land that it would require to sustain us has increased, and that's why our impact is high. So either we live in these smaller towns with very minimal lifestyle to reduce that number to zero, right? Then our ecological footprint would be zero. We would say that my city has the capacity to only give me 0.4 hectares for my day-to-day needs, and my ecological footprint is 0.4 hectares. That means that I have zero like I'm nullifying it. But if my city only has the capacity of 0.4 hectares per person, and I am living the life of I'm living a very lavish life, and my life requires for me to have 2 hectares of land, and let's say there are 200 other people in my city who want are living the same kind of life and would need 200 hectares, then that would mean that we are taking much more space or much more resources from the space than the city can take care of, and that just increases the impact. I don't know if I explained it better, but this wasn't, it wasn't really put there for you to know exactly what ecological footprint is or exactly what IPET is. It was just there for you to understand that the environment has certain resources. We are relying on those renewable and non-renewable resources. We are creating an impact on the natural capital. And because we are creating an impact on the natural capital, we need to measure what's good and what's bad and how much should we do, whether the kind of lives that we're living is better or not. And that's why there are all of these models. And these are the most basic models, because now you have carbon footprint, water footprint, and God knows what. And similarly, you don't have a simple model like IPET to monitor the environment. They've become so much more complicated. But I just wanted you to have a look at this. And I think before I take in some questions, the time is already over. But some of you came 5 minutes late, so I will take the liberty to take extra 2 to 3 minutes. I'm giving you a home task, which is reading these 2 articles. They are simple articles. One is about iPad. It's basically relying on that same model and discussing something. And the other is about human ecology. So the ecosystem services and how we are living on the planet. And something else that I want you to look on the side is the tragedy of the commons. You don't have to read research papers about it, but it's basically about what happens when we share a certain resource and there is this common resource. If we as residents of the planet are using it, then what kind of tragedies happen to that common resource? Just understand what it is. You don't need to go into the depths. And even the readings that I've provided for this week are very, very simple. And I will try and upload the lecture as soon as possible so that you can do the reading before the next class. And I'll give you some time. If you have any quick questions, then I can take it. And then you're free from my side. Does anyone have any question or no?
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
So, ma'am, talking about the IPAT model, is it logical to consider 2 countries? Suppose if we take 2 developed countries, and if we measure, we get a certain number of the impact, and so it is wise to consider 2 countries having different geographical area, different resources, human and natural. So, how will we ensure that the result we get in the form of impact would be accurate and it will have no bias, any sort of inaccuracy and
Yeah, so first of all, no model is a perfect model. Although I don't work with models, but no equation, no model is a perfect model to measure something. And that's one thing that's happening in research right now, that people are continuously playing with the models, taking a lot more external things into account, making it more and more complicated to make sure that the input is increased, the kind of data is increased, samples are increased, data size is increased, geographical area is increased, and yet people say that the model is not accurate enough. The reason why I wanted to share it here was for you to get a sense of monitoring, environmental monitoring, or understanding how you can measure the impact that you're creating on the environment. And I mean, there can be multiple ways to look at it. I did not really assign a number, but I asked you to guess something. And because we are talking about population, and we are talking about effluence, and we're talking about the impact that the technology that they use is creating, we are very clear with what we are considering when we're comparing the two countries. So if I think for those terms, the equation would be accurate, or the calculation would be accurate. But if, let's say, you're talking about water pollution, and one country has a lot of surface water, and it's putting contaminated water into its surface water, and that's the kind of impact that it's creating. But because the surface water is high and the water is diluting, it's actually, the equation's not giving you a clear sense. Whereas another country is treating all of its wastewater and then throwing it into the environment, but because the surface water volume is low, the contamination are still the same. It can vary, but this is not an equation that we are going to use to calculate an impact. It's just an equation for us to understand how do we monitor impacts on the environment. Because if we want to do monitoring, and if we want to do it accurately, I'll have to teach you very complicated equations or very complicated tools. And I hope I answered your question. Rafi.
Yeah, man.
Hello, ma'am. I'm gonna ask the ecological footprint.
Mhm.
It's completely unrelated to how much waste we produce or the sort of technology or affluence we have, right?
Yeah.
So it's probably, wouldn't it be more suitable to perhaps like more primitive societies and not like it doesn't give us much information about what we need as of today,
So
right?
yeah, I mean, I still like the concept of ecological footprint, because when I started studying this field, it's difficult to kind of bring everything into one ground. Like basically what ecological footprint tells you is how many planets would you need if you live the kind of life that you live. So if I've, at some point in the slides, I've given you one of the websites where you can go and calculate your footprint. There are many online sites where you can go and simply calculate your footprint. But if, let's say, you're measuring your ecological footprint on that site, and it tells you that the kind of life that you're living, and if every person on the planet lives that kind of life, you would need 3 more planets. It's already enough for me to know that I'm not living a sustainable life, right? So there are ways to look at it, but it's obvious that when it comes to ecological footprint, you're only thinking about renewable resources. You're only thinking about water, at least most of the models that have been developed. The water use and the land, mostly you're dealing with that. And not, again, it's not a lot of factors into account. But this is also changing. So data is continuously evolving. A lot of websites are now changing their data sets to improve this very well. And it's come down to individual water footprint, carbon footprint, land footprint, and many other things. And sometimes a mixture of all as well, like the nexuses that we're talking about. That what about energy footprint? And what about how energy footprint would influence water footprint or carbon footprint, etc., etc. But
One more thing.
yeah, go ahead.
Um, when you talk about water footprint, and basically we're talking about how much land or water we need, and that's usually going to be linked to how much food we're producing, right? So shouldn't that essentially be the same for us? Like, since I'm sure that just depends on how many people you have. Like, I'm sure, like us in Pakistan, we probably use we also use a lot of land for our food, and this people abroad do the same thing. So my point is, then why do we have such a huge difference between a developed country and
A developing country? I think majorly because of the affluence. So for example, even if I was living in Pakistan and if I traveled to London to do my shopping, and if I bought all the brands, and let's say that they are taking um, animal products that come from Africa, so then my ecological footprint would increase a lot
oh,
compared to you, because now the kind of lifestyle that I'm living, the kind of products that I'm using, the kind of land that I would need to meet my needs, which is 10 designer bags and XYZ amount of this, then you know even if you were my neighbor in Pakistan, our footprints would change, and that would actually mean that the number of earths that I would need if everyone was living a lifestyle like me would be much higher. So which is why I said, when you give such kind of tests online just for fun, like you don't have to, but if you're interested and you want to do it, and if you give a test, it would say 2.4 earths or 1.8 earths. It basically means that if everyone lived like you, that's how much space that they would need. Like this earth would not be enough. So for this earth to be enough, our affluence and consumption needs to come down.
Thank you.
Right, some people have already left, and if you guys don't have a question, then I can, everyone else can leave, and maybe I will speak with Summer and end the class. And thank you for coming. Thank you for taking part in the class. Summer, do you have anything for me? Are you on mute? Let me unmute you.
Yes, so I wanted to get the course outline. Basically, what is the structure, like assignment, CP, attendance, like the weightage for all of the components.
Okay. So I will evolve some of it. Maybe we need to have a discussion on this separately, but I can give you a general outline that I've already developed. Because, for example, I've given them an activity as an assignment, but I might change it to 50% of midterm because it's an extensive activity. But the outline would more or less remain the same. Yeah, and what else? Yeah, I will share the details with you, anything that I have, the course outline, anything that comes back from Aro and Noman, I will forward it to you. But if you have more questions, like you can let me know.
Okay, sure. So I just received an email about the CP point, the written CP and something. I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, so I gave a CP, and because people are still coming in, I have received some of them on email and some of them on LMS. This time I will compile it because they're lying everywhere, and I haven't received it from everywhere, but from next time onwards, maybe I'll let you collect them and make sure that everyone has submitted it.
Okay, so I wanted to understand कि CP की कितनी weightage है and like क्या scene है, like is it going to be in every class?
Yeah, so maybe you can like I said, maybe put some people that you think are very good in the class somewhere, like note it down. But also there is written CP. So maybe for class participation, we can have a very small percentage, but that written CP will have more weightage. So for example, if it's 1 point for week 1, then maybe the written CP can be 0.8 and the class or the written CP can be 0.6 and the class participation can be 0.4, and then it's 1 mark. But that we can discuss that. I generally think because a lot of kids are shy and they don't get to talk, we should give more weightage to written CP. But just because maybe some people don't want to talk, and then I do want to discourage that. So maybe I would actually want some of the kids to contribute actively in the class, and then they would deserve extra points, I think.
And what about the attendance? Like mentioned, taking attendance at the start of the class and randomly towards the middle and then towards the end. But I was thinking that would it interrupt your lecture and like काफी disturbance नहीं हो जाएगी and time is like वो efficient तरीका हो, like perhaps I can ask them in the chat box के attendance time, and you can, whoever is present can type present in the chat box randomly at different points.
Chat box is also really dodgy because sometimes kids just talk there and they're not listening to or watching, because I also want them to check the screen, right? So I don't know, how does the polling here work? Have you ever done the polling here? Oh, I'm recording all of it.
The hand type. Perhaps we can discuss this in another meeting.
No, it's okay. I just paused it. So let me also, I don't know. Let me remove the guests. Yeah, okay. So now I've removed everyone and we can discuss. Yes, so I need to send you the course outline. And we need to discuss how many quizzes, assignments, and because quizzes, I might leave them with you. And also we need to discuss what's the best mean, because I don't know how should online quizzes work. So we need to discuss that. Maybe I can discuss that with other people here. And then we need to, because even though I asked so many people to turn on their cameras today, many people were just not there. And I could not, they were, at least last time they were raising hands a lot because I asked them to participate a lot. Every time I asked something, most of them were raising hands. But this time, because I was asking one question, there were the same 2-3 people who were raising hands continuously and not anybody else. So I don't know, maybe and also about the attendance, like, can we do the poll? Let's test it. So if I create a poll and add a question and ask the question, like, I don't know, we will have to think of what's the best way to take the attendance. So if you put it in the chat box, maybe I can just make a quick announcement of turning on their videos while I ask a question.
Yes, I think they can turn it on for like a minute. That wouldn't be hard.
Yeah,
That way we
and
can
then
figure out if they're
in
present or
that
not.
time you can,
And that can,
yeah, I can even post the video during that, like the video recording. I can say, you're free to ask questions, but also if I ask a question and say that you have to answer it, maybe I can pause the video recording and ask everyone to turn on their cameras while they're answering. And then I will say that you will take attendance based on a video, which means that even if people have poor internet, they should still have a stuck picture, right? Or they should have their videos unclicked. So even if it's that, like, even if it goes from cross to open, you can mark their presence. Because some people may have poor internet, but we need to find out who those people are as well. And I don't know what we should do, but what did you observe, like, in the class today? What would you suggest should I do better?
yeah, I felt it should have been more discussion based, because I felt like only like जिस तरह ये होता है ना कि सिर्फ 2 to 3 people या 4 to 5 people who are attentive and who are like the lecture seems interesting to them, they would participate. The rest are like sleeping, and that happens pretty much every lecture that occurs in numbers. So
Yeah.
यही होता है, at the start everybody is really active, but towards the middle or end में जाके सिर्फ 4-5 लोग होते हैं who are active. So
Yeah.
probably, and I think discussion based would be a good idea. And you can perhaps announce, even though somebody does not want to turn on their cameras, you can randomly ask somebody a question from the
Yeah.
lecture.
Yeah, I wanted to do that, but I also
And that perhaps that could be CP.
Yeah, okay. So I did not want to scare them in the first 2 weeks. That's why I thought, I don't know if it would be a good idea to